2, 1, go! Alright!
Alright, welcome back. In this episode, I talk about fuel tanks. We talk about Superjet tanks, 3-gallon tanks, cold fusion tanks, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons.
So we're gonna lap a flywheel to the nose of a crank.
And as a bonus feature, we have a little bit of footage from Lake Diaz in Florida near Daytona. This is in 2021. We got Dusty Evans and Anthony Vidal there ripping it up. Hey, welcome back. Let's talk fuel tanks. So you have your build already figured out in your mind. You got your motor, your pump, your hull, your pole. You figured everything's good. The last thing you consider really your fuel tank. So depending on what kind of ski you want to build and the availability of a fuel tank will depend on which one you get. So all right, for an edge, you either want a Superjet style tank or a cold fusion tank. They're really hard to get now. Or probably a 2-tank configuration when you have a rear tank and then a front tank. So with this configuration, you got like 1.4 gallons in the back and 3 gallons in the front. And it's pretty crammed. I think this is a pretty tight setup. This is what you have to do for a lay-down pipe, where the pipe kind of swoops around on the front. That is not the most ideal situation, but because it leaves with the water box here, you don't really have a place for the battery, so you have to wedge that under. I put it under here, I put it on top of the water box. You don't really have any room back there because of the rear tank. It's pretty tight. Alright, so in a Superjet, you're pretty much just going to want to use that tank. Fits, like B-pipe fits it just fine. I would not put a lay-down pipe in a Superjet. So keep that one, or the cold fusion tank, or a Superjet tank with an internal fill. Well, speaking of the cold fusion tank, it's probably the best tank out there, I'd say. For one, it's almost 5 gallons. You have you have 2 pickups, a return, and a line in for a check valve here. A nice billet top, and then it has there's actually flexible lines in there with clinkers. Yeah, they might be pretty stiff now, but it should have clinkers in the bottom that go along with the tank, so if you're on your side, the fuel will be picking up from the bottom. If you're doing a freestyle ski, here's my nitro here. We have front tank installed, and that's a 2-gallon Jazz tank, but you can buy these from Xtreme. However, they don't come built. They come like this with just a hole in the top, but it's just, so basically you have to take one of these lids, cut a big hole, seal it up on both sides, and get that in there. I don't know if they're making these caps anymore with the built-in check valve. When I've tried to get that part individually, I had a hard time with it. You might be able to get it from Xtreme still, but the new style has this flip-up thing here and with no built-in check valve. So that's one additional thing. So like these, there's 2 on each side. So Phil Clemens of P&P Performance built this, and he puts these in, and then this is the tank for the DVX, and then I have a strap for each one. Let's see here. If you're looking at building an aftermarket hull like an Edge or an XFR or something like that, and you want a full-size tank, the cold fusion ones are really hard to get right now. So I'd recommend getting a OEM tank, so you can buy them brand new, under 200 bucks. What I don't like about them is that you have to block off this, so this is essentially extra. And then you got these two nipples on the top here. You know, one's for the return, one's for the check valve. But they're just kind of in the way and potential area to break. Then you have to get a internal fill. Blowsion has one. Cold Fusion also makes one, but they're pretty limited now. That's an option. I bought this for some other skis to make them look nice, because they look just awesome when they're just pearly white like that instead of yellow or worse like that. But there are some options. Hopefully that helps. There is a thrust one I also have that is shaped for a laydown pipe, but Thrust no longer makes them anymore. So there's no, not that option. I know Blowsion has a few. They're metal tanks. One problem I don't like metal tanks personally, especially if they're strapped down. I had a limited slip tank with a battery mount, and you know, by the time you add, I had a lead acid, you know, 9-pound lightweight Deca battery. It's a smaller size, but it's still lead acid AGM. And you know, by the time you add a 9-pound battery, and then you have probably a 6-pound gas tank, fill it full of gas. I was trying to think of the ski, what's it gonna do when you land upside down? And that big heavy gas tank with a battery on it just hits everything. It hits your nice motor, hits your nice exhaust pipe, especially with the battery in it. It's just too much weight, and it hits your hood. Like, I had a chip on my XFR on the top of the hood from the gas tank, and I had a hard time getting it strapped down. I think rubber straps aren't strong enough. You either need some kind of a ratchet or a hard mount for a metal tank. But I shy away from them now. I don't like metal tanks anymore. So, and even on this one, I had to kind of bend in the tank there a little bit to clear this exhaust pipe. I just kind of have it thrown in here now, but trying to get the motor as far as forward as possible, to get the laydown pipe as far forward as possible. And yeah, so dual tanks, I'm not a huge fan of them, but they do give you more capacity. Depends on how your refueling situation is, but I prefer a single tank, like I think in an Edge. I don't think I'll ever put a laydown pipe in it again. This was set up for it originally. I always put like a B pipe and a Superjet style tank and an Edge, or like an FB Pro or something like that, or SB Pro, whatever the surf model is.
So we're gonna lap a flywheel to the nose of a crank, and the reason you do this is to you basically polish the two surfaces to each other. So when you crank down your flywheel, they seat together nice and snug. So it basically takes a bunch of pressure and wear off your woodruff key. So it'll just help everything keep together, keep your flywheel from like moving back and forth, possibly throwing off your timing, and also just keeping the longevity of all the parts together. So with lapping the flywheel, I just kind of got some stuff off of Amazon or whatever, but I got a fine metal lapping compound, which is actually not that fine. So I start with this and get it till it's really close, and then I got a nice diamond compound, and this is it's kind of like a good finish to it, so they're nice, kind of polishes them together quite well. And so basically when you start out, you'll start out with your fine grit, which I already did that portion of it, so I'm just going to move on to the diamond, but it's the same process for both of them. So I already got the fine done, so the diamond grit, I'll just rub some on the nose, and this is, like I said, more of a polishing, whereas the fine grit's actually mating the two surfaces a little bit better. Yeah, I just put some on the nose, and then I'll just put some on the inside of the actual flywheel itself. And then the process through it is the same throughout it. you'll take the flywheel and you'll put it over the nose of the crank, and you'll seat it. You'll just put slight pressure forward on it, nothing too hard, and you'll just rock them back and forth. You know, do a couple turns, and you'll pull it out just to reset the sanding compound so you don't have the grit just constantly grinding in the same spot. You'll just pull it off, turn it a few times, pull it out, put it back on, turn it a few times, and that just kind of keeps it so you're not putting grooves in all the same spots. So you'll just keep turning it, and then eventually as you're going, you'll start to feel it be less gritty, and it'll get nice and soft, and it'll turn really nice and smooth. And that's kind of how you know like how well it's like seating and stuff. So once you go through this process on the fine, and it gets to the point where it's like feels nice and smooth, it's not really hanging up anywhere, and it turns really nice and easy, then I clean it up and I move to the diamond, and I start the process all over again. So we'll just turn it a few times, we'll pull it off, reseat it, turn it a few times, pull it off and reseat it until it feels like it's nice and smooth. It's not very gritty anymore. It kind of turns really nice and easy. And then at that point, you know it's pretty close. So, and then once you're done, you'll just make sure, I usually use a solvent, and I'll clean the nose of the crank really well, and I'll clean the flywheel really well. You just don't want any of the actual grit in the lapping compound to get into the teeth of your flywheel or into the threads of your bolt, because you could possibly damage some stuff. So just make sure you clean it up really well, and that should help keep your flywheel stay nice and seated on your crank, which will keep your timing in place, and should help keep all your parts for lasting a bit longer. So hopefully it helps. Whee!
That's all for this week's episode. Please come on back. There'll be more.